Hi everyone, my name is Tiffany Refutation, and for my refutation, I will be responding to Roman Benavidez' claim that the death penalty has a positive impact on criminal justice. So to support his claim, my opponent stated that the death penalty ends any further crime for the criminal, that the death penalty gives closure to the family and anyone related to the victim, and that punishment should fit the crime. As for his first supporting claim that the death penalty ends any further crime for the criminal, he focuses on the possibility of escape and uses a singular example of two men that escaped from a high-security prison for 8 days. In response, the use of his isolated example was defective to the claim because it did not demonstrate a significant negative impact on criminal justice. The two prisoners escaped for 8 days and did not commit any violent crimes. So as Roman states, escape is a very rare occurrence. In fact, less than 1% of all prisoners ever escape penitentiaries, let alone escape and commit further crimes. In a report by Richard F. Kolb of John Jay College of Criminal Justice about national data on prison escapes, he found that beyond aggregate jurisdictional approximation of how many prisoners escape from custody, little is known about how many escapees are involved in additional crimes in the community, the risk of violent behavior posed by an escapee, as well as other related factors. So in countering his claim, I believe that in relation to the escape and recidivism, resources would be better spent on security, training, and rehabilitation. As for his second claim, his second supporting claim that the death penalty gives closure to the victim's family or anyone related to the victim, he used personal explanation and a singular example of a victim's family suing the state of California to have their offender be put down. Now, although his explanation and example were partially effective, he failed to demonstrate the depth of the claim and any other viewpoints. So many people who have lost a family member to murder do not wish for their offender to be killed. So for example, from a booklet composed of testimonies of families who have lost loved ones to murder, here are 3 separate accounts. So Daryl and Myers and Naomi White, which are JoJo's parents who was murdered, says that we do not think that the execution of JoJo's killer will make the world a better place. We honor JoJo's life by working for peace and social justice, goals that were important to him. Second, Abigail, Catherine's mother, says that 12 years after Catherine's death, I wrote a letter to Mr. Mickey, her daughter's murderer, telling him that I forgave him. The act of mailing that letter resulted in instant healing. Andre Heron, Danny's sister, says that although all the death penalty can ever do for the victim survivors is blind them to more hate and more murder, and to keep them living in the fallacious hope that once the perpetrator is executed by the state, they will feel better. And in countering his claim, I believe that in regard to closure, resources would be better used on violence prevention, and victim services. And as for his third supporting claim, that punishment should fit the crime, he used personal explanation and a comment from the Daily Titan that focuses on the death penalty's role in justice and setting an example for future potential criminals in the hopes to deter crime. Now, in response, his value claim does not effectively support his claim of fact. His explanations are based on his personal opinion as well as a quote from the Daily Titan, but the author, Brian Chester, of the comment used is not a professional of the field, but rather a reporter and opinion writer for the Fullerton newspaper. And in countering his claim, I believe that crime is not deterred by the death penalty. A report by the National Research Council stated that studies claiming that the death penalty has a deterrent effect on murder rates are fundamentally flawed and should not be used when making policy decisions. As well as according to a survey of the former and present presidents of the county's top academic criminological societies, 88% of experts rejected the notion that the death penalty acts as a deterrent to murder. And this concludes my refutation. Thank you for your time.
All right, structurally, everything is really sound. It's easy to follow. On the first point, you kind of diminish the risk of potential crimes being committed by suggesting that the number of escapees is incredibly low. There is a little bit of doubt about whether or not they commit crimes subsequent to escaping, so there's a little bit of diminishment there. I don't know exactly what the risk would be, for instance, of high-profile capital criminals escaping from prison. You do talk about the one example that the advocate used, and you suggested that there wasn't any consequence there. So at the moment, it appears that there's not a lot of information suggesting potential harm, although I'm sure that most people would probably feel a little uncomfortable about having somebody who's an escaped murderer in their neighborhood. Whether or not there's an actual crime, there is a security issue. That would probably be a potential response that the advocate could come back with. The second point on closure, I think you did a nice job suggesting that closure is a little bit problematic. It's somewhat subjective. You've got specific examples where closure is being achieved by the families of victims in other ways or without the necessity of having a death or an execution being carried out. I think that that's pretty good. I don't remember how strong the advocate's evidence on these particular points where you do both the first and the second point. You have these claims that you make right before you move on where you suggest, well, the money would be better spent doing something else, but then there's no evidence to support that there would be any impact from spending the money that way. So I think you've got kind of this extra claim that you're tagging on each of these points that either needs some proof or they need to be left out of the argument. The third argument, I think you're much more specific. You tell us that it's a value argument, not really a claim of fact, and that it's dependent on personal opinion, and that the author of the source or the quote that is being quoted here is not really an expert. I think those are all good challenges to the advocate's claim there. And then you've got counterclaims that you're presenting, suggesting that the research is unreliable and that there's a consensus of opinion that suggests that there isn't an impact on this. I think that that's a good generic way of going after that argument. It's not necessarily the best argument, but in the absence of specific evidence from the advocate, I think we can give you some leeway in the general responses that you've got there. All right, thank you.